Hello, welcome all. This is Abhilash. In this session, I am going to talk on the classical theory and the Keynesian theory. So, this topic we're covering in the money banking subject, Unit 4. So, first, start with the classical theory. The fundamental principle of the classical theory is that the economy is self-regulating. Classical economics maintain the economy is always capable of achieving the natural level of real GDP, which is level of the real GDP that is obtained when the economy's resources are fully employed. While circumstances arise from time to time that cause the economy to fall below or to exceed the natural level of real GDP. Self-adjustment mechanism exist within the market system that work to bring the economy back to the natural level of real GDP. The classical doctrine that the economy is always at or near the natural level of real GDP is based on two firmly held beliefs, sales laws and the belief that prices, wages and interests are flexible. Right? The classical employment occurs when the real wages are kept above the market clearing wage rate, leading to surplus of labor supply. Classical unemployment is sometimes known as a real wage unemployment because it refers to real wage being too high. There are two main assumptions of classical theory of employment, namely assumption of full employment and flexibility of price and wages. You can see here figure 1, the classical theory of interest rate adjustment in money market. Before that, I will explain the main assumptions of the classical theory of output and employment. Okay, the classical economics believed in the existence of full employment in the economy. To them, full employment was a normal situation of any deviation from this regarded as something abnormal. So assumptions, the first assumption was there is the existence of the full employment without inflation. Second, there is a less fair capitalist economy without government interference. Third, it is a closed economy without foreign trade. The fourth assumption is there is perfect competition in labor and product market. The fifth is labor is homogeneous. Sixth, the total output of the economy is divided between consumption and investment expenditure. Seven, the quantity of money is given and money is only the medium of exchange. Eight, wages and prices are perfectly flexible. Ninth, there is perfect information on the part of all market participants. 11th, 10th, the money wages and real wages are directly related and proportional. So it is related to each other. Savings are automatically invested and equality between the two is brought about by the market by the rate of interest. Capital stock and technical knowledge are given. The law of the diminishing returns operates in production. And 14, it assumes long run. If there is a general overproduction in the economy, some laborers may be asked to leave their job. The problem of unemployment arises in the economy in the short run. In the long run, the economy will automatically tend toward full employment when the demand and supply of goods become equal. So when a producer produces goods and pays wages to workers, the workers in turn buy those goods in the market. So thus the very act of supplying goods implies a demand for them. Sorry, it is in this way that supply creates its own demand, right? So in this here you can consider, however, what happens when the funds from aggregate saving exceed the needs of all borrowers in the economy. In this situation, real GDP will fall below its natural level because investment expenditure will be less than the level of aggregate saving. The situation is illustrated in this figure. You can see the interest rate on the y-axis, and on x-axis where you can see the aggregate saving or aggregate investment, right? So aggregate saving Saving represented by the curve S in an upward and sloping function of the interest rate. As the interest rate rises, the economy tend to save more. Aggregate investment represented by the curve is a downward and sloping function of the interest rate. As interest rate rises, the cost of borrowing increases and the investment expenditure decline. Initially, aggregate saving and investments are equivalent at the interest rate. If aggregate saving were to increase, causing the S curve to shift to the right to S. So then the same interest rate, a gap emerged between the investment and the saving. Aggregate investment will be lower than the aggregate saving, implying that equilibrium real GDP will be below its natural level. The flexible interest rate, wages and prices. Classical economists believe that under these circumstances, the interest rate will follow, causing investors to demand more of the available savings. In fact, the interest rate will fall far enough from to you can see in the figure to make the supply of funds from aggregate saving equal to the demand for funds by all investors. Hence, an increase in savings will lead to an increase in investment expenditure through a reduction of the interest rate, and the economy will always return to the natural level of real GDP. The flexibility of interest rate as well as the other prices is a self-adjusting mechanism of a classical theory that ensures that the real GDP is always at its natural level. The flexibility of interest rates keeps the money market or the market for loanable funds in equilibrium all the time and thus prevents real GDP from falling below its natural level. Similarly, flexibility of the wages rate keeps the labor market or the market for workers in equilibrium all the time. If the supply of worker exceeds firm demand for workers, then wages paid to workers will fall so as to ensure that workforce is fully employed. Classic economics believe that any unemployment that occurs in the labor market or in the resources market should be considered voluntary unemployment. Voluntarily unemployment workers are unemployed because they refuse to accept lower wages. If they would only accept lower wages, firms would be eager to employ them. So we can see here another illustration, graphical illustration of the classical theory as it is related to decrease in aggregate demand, right? So on the y-axis the price level is there, P1, P2, P3. On the x-axis you can see the y1, y2, that is the real GDP. Right, so this is the classical theory of output and price level adjustment during the recession. So the immediate short-run effect is that the economy moves down along the SAS curve labeled SAS1. You can see here, right? Causing the equilibrium price level to fall from P1 to P2 and the equilibrium real GDP to fall below its natural level from Y1 to Y2. Here you can see if real GDP falls below its natural level, the economic workers and resources are not being fully employed. When there are unemployed resources, the classical theory predicts that the wages paid to these resources will fall. With the fall in wages, suppliers will be able to supply more goods at lower cost, causing the SAS curve to shift to the right from SAS1 to SAS2. Here, from it has shifted from SAS1 to SAS2. The end result is that the equilibrium price level falls to P3, but the economy returns to the natural level of GDP level. Okay, so this is just about the classical theory. Okay, so give me a minute. We will start the Keynesian theory. Okay, so here we go. Keynesian theory. So Lord Keynes analyzed deeply the problem of unemployment and concluded that the main cause of unemployment was deficiency of effective demand. Effective demand refers to the level of aggregate demand where it is equal to aggregate supply. He therefore suggested that the unemployment would be removed by increasing the effective demand. Okay. So Keynesian economics is a macroeconomic economic theory of total spending in the economy and it affects on output, employment and inflation. Keynesian economics was developed by the British economist John Maynard Keynes during 1930 in an attempt to understand the Great Depression. Keynesian economics is considered a demand-side theory that focuses on change in the economy over the short run. Keynes' theory was the first to sharply separate the study of economic behavior and the market based on the individual incentives from the study of both national economic aggregate variables and custom. Some key takeaways from the Keynesian theory. Keynesian economics focuses on using active government policy to manage aggregate demand in order to address or prevent economic recessions. Keynes developed his theories in response to the Great Depression and was highly critical of previous economic theories, which he referred to as classical economics. Activist fiscal and monetary policy are the primary tool recommended by the Keynesian economics to manage the economy and the fight unemployment. Keynesian versus classical theory. According to the classical economics, money is demanded for transaction motive alone. On the contrary, Keynes maintained that money is demanded for transaction motive as well as speculative motive. According to the classical economists, supply of labor depends on real wages. On the contrary, Keynes believes that it depends on money wage. In classical theory, saying is a function of rate of interest. Keynes is a way Keynes is of view the saving is a function of an income. Why there is a need of Keynesian theory. During the Great Depression of the 1930s, existing economic theory was unable either to explain the causes of the severe worldwide economic collapse or to provide an adequate public policy solution to remove unemployment. Key points. According to Lord Keynes, full employment is not a normal feature of a developed capitalist economy. There can be unemployment in every economy. The main reason for this unemployment is a deficiency of aggregate demand. Unemployment can be removed by increasing the aggregate demand. Many countries like America, France adopted all such measures failed to remove unemployment as were recommended by classical theory of unemployment, that is reduction of money wages and falls in rate of interest. So what is aggregate supply and aggregate demand? Aggregate supply refers to the schedule showing aggregate supply received at different levels of unemployment. Aggregate supply price received to the total amount that all the producers must receive by selling the output produced at a given level of employment. Aggregate demand refers to a schedule showing aggregate demand price received at different level of employment. So according to the him, aggregate demand comprised of demand for two types of goods: demand for consumption goods and demand for investment goods. So Lord Keynes was of the opinion that to remove unemployment and to achieve full employment, government interference in the economy is imperative. Prior to Lord Keynes' famous classic economics, Malthus had also opined that the main cause of fall in the employment was the deficiency of effective demand, but the Malthus could not explain the reason behind the deficiency of the effective demand. Assumption of the Keynesian theory: the short period closed economy, labor is the only factor of production. So this was the assumption, and we have three more assumptions under the employment equilibrium: saving and investment function, and labor has a money illusion. Right. So we have a further explanation of theory as well. So let me explain this theory with the example. The basic concept of Keynesian theory is that level of employment in a country is determined by the aggregate demand and aggregate supply. Effective demand refers to that level of aggregate demand at which it is equal to aggregate supply. Example: by employing 1 lakh labor in a country at any given time, the aggregate supply is worth of rupees 100 crore, and the aggregate demand at every time period is also rupees 100 crore. Then in that situation, aggregate demand price will be equal to aggregate supply price. So Y is a national income or output. Y is equal to F into N. Here F is a function and N is a number of employment, level of employment. So below we have one formula: N is equal to F into ED. So level of employment is equal to a function of effective demand. And then effective demand expresses equality between the aggregate demand and aggregate supply. Okay. So this is all about the Keynesian theory and the classical theory. Thank you. Best wishes.